Our jurors for this were myself, Miguel Novello, Stanford MFA student, Diane Holliday, our Museum Educational Programs teaching assistant, and Kate Holohan, assistant curator for academic engagement. We considered the work itself and the artwork explanations submitted by the artists and made our selections based on the merits of the work, how well it spoke to the themes of the exhibition and to current events, and how much conversation that it generated. It was a really difficult choice as we had a lot of wonderful submissions, and I'd like to thank everyone who submitted their work, and I'd like to congratulate our winners and just say I'm excited to be in conversation with you tonight.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maggie. So to start off, we're going to give each artist about 5 minutes to talk with Maggie and discuss their own work, just to give everyone a rundown of how the evening will look. The first artist whose art we will be looking at is Cathy Yang, she, her. Cathy is a co-term student studying art practice and computer science.
Hi, I'm Cathy. Thank you so much for hosting this event. And this is my piece that you're seeing. This is a digital illustration, and I created this right around June of this year, when we were starting to see a lot of media coverage of the Black Lives Matter protests all over the country. And I was really struck by how a lot of these protests we were seeing were coinciding with the 31st anniversary of the June 4th incident, which took place on June 4th, 1989 in Beijing, China. And it holds a lot of significance for not just a lot of Chinese people, but also people in the Chinese diaspora all over the world. So a lot of first generation Chinese American immigrants, my parents included, were actually inspired or incited to immigrate out of China after witnessing what happened on June 4th, 1989, when they saw thousands of student protesters who were calling for democracy kind of be met with really violent police and military suppression from the government, which was not so dissimilar to what we're seeing in America right now. And that's kind of my main inspiration for creating this piece, is just to commemorate this really important date, and also to just kind of celebrate, I guess, like the kinds of activism that occur across time and space, you know, decade after decade, even in like very violent and seemingly impossible situations.
Thank you, Cathy, for sharing those thoughts on this work. We, the jury, were really, really impressed with the thought behind it and this kind of melding of two moments across time. And we especially appreciated the graphic style and your bold use of color. And it seemed really reminiscent to us of political posters. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about why you decided to work in this style and how you came to this layout.
Yeah. So this is a digital illustration, so it was pretty easy and quick to play with the colors. And you're absolutely right. There's kind of a lot of inspiration from political posters, and specifically political propaganda posters, and more specifically from the Chinese Cultural Revolution, where I spent a lot of time like looking at these posters that, you know, seem like so foreign in their message. But they have like these really beautiful bright reds and yellows, and also this like very graphic style with really strong lines and well-defined shapes. And they're similar to posters that you would see in other communist countries or communist movements. And I find it really interesting that art and like a lot of other visual mediums can both be like a vehicle of political propaganda and also a tool for protest and activism.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, especially when you compare a kind of propaganda style from communist countries or formerly communist countries with current events happening in the United States today, and kind of what is that use of that particular style imply about what's going on today in terms of our leadership. But we were also really intrigued by your use of the two different languages for writing out the dates for the two events, and we were curious why it was important for you to write the dates kind of in those two languages.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I started creating this piece, I knew that I wanted to incorporate the date in some significant way, just because that is such a meaningful date in, I guess, like modern Chinese culture. And in Chinese, it's Liu Si, just the numbers 6 and 4. Just like saying that can like invoke a lot of memories and meaning for a lot of people. So I knew I definitely wanted to incorporate that. And I think I chose to use two different languages. So I wrote the date in Chinese and also in English, but kind of in a more like modern way of writing the date. So I use like the actual numbers instead of like the Chinese characters for those numbers, just because I think it's easier to recognize from looking at the Chinese text that it's the same date, or it's the same day, but in 1989, just to draw that parallel again, that even though this is or these are kind of two very different places and during very different times, we are seeing like similar types of activism and resilience against or in the face of violence and oppression. And I think I also wanted to highlight that they're different, and that these are like, even though the scenes are kind of similar and you see large crowds of people, they're like kind of fundamentally different events. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. They're very rooted in their own time and place, and that's important for understanding them. Wonderful. Thank you, Cathy, and congratulations.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Cathy. Okay, the next artist whose work we'll be looking at is Maya Sheneshev. She, her. Maya is a sophomore studying electrical engineering.
Thank you so much for having this event. This piece is inspired by the diary of Rutka Laskew. She was a Polish Jewish teenager who wrote a diary, a pretty short account in Będzin, Poland, in the ghetto of Będzin, Poland in 1943. The title references a line in one of her diary entries where she wrote about the time she spent in nature and the community that she felt when she spent in nature, and also reflecting on her family's time, greatly inspired by the folk art and the music of Poland and Eastern Europe in general. And over the years, it's been a way for me to connect with the history of this region, as well as my family's own history, which holds a lot of tragedy, but is also suffused with so much natural beauty. And I really like to reflect on the artists who have also had inspiration from this natural beauty as well.
That's great. Thank you, Maya. We were really thrilled with this work, and thank you for submitting it. One of the things we particularly loved was the folk art motifs of the flowers that you included, and also your use of color and sort of rustic style that are also reminiscent of folk art. So can you tell us more about why you wanted to reference folk art in this work?
Definitely. So all my life, I've been exposed to folk art through my family, and it's been my main source of connection to Poland through the pottery, through the paintings, and through also getting to know some other artists, some other folk artists working in Poland. So for me, when I wanted to explore these heavier themes of tragedy and loss in both my family experience in the events of the 20th century, and also broadly other families that I knew, it really felt like a natural point of entry for me to use this as an anchor for the questions that I was asking and for the themes that I was reflecting on. And it's always just something that I can keep going back to when the things that I read about or the things that I learn are pretty tough. And it's just always kind of a constant presence there that I really wanted to, I hope that this reflected in my piece. And I also really found it inspirational and I guess touching for me to see this appreciation for the beauty of the region and the nature reflected in the written works that I took my inspiration from this piece.
That's beautiful. It really grounds it in a very recognizable visual identity, and it's very appealing. And I was also particularly interested to hear about kind of how painting scenes inspired by someone else's story has helped you tap into thinking about your own family's history and migration story.
So it's definitely deepened my connection with the region, especially as I've been examining the history of Poland and Eastern Europe as a whole, both from a broader perspective and also from a personal perspective. And sometimes I felt like it was, I knew that I wanted to explore these themes and all these questions that I had and was asking, but it sometimes felt difficult to find a place to start. So only through this mode of specificity, when I was reading these first person accounts, was I really able to reflect more and anchor my questions. And it also provided me a way to reflect on my own family's experience in a way that I wasn't really able to without this kind of grounding and specificity.
That's wonderful. I find that really resonates so well with the purpose of exhibiting art, right? To share stories and hopefully help other people reflect on their stories. So thank you and congratulations, Maya.
Yes, thank you so much,
Thank
Maya.
you.
Our next artist is Elaine Park, she, her. Elaine is a senior studying psychology and communication.
Hi, everyone. So this is a digital illustration, and I think, first of all, the theme really spoke to me because of the relevant issues that are happening around us. And amidst all the suffering, I felt like this piece could highlight the celebration and connections that have maybe strengthened in the face of these crises, because we're not in the same physical space, and not all of us have the privilege to be in comfortable, safe places. And so I personally took that for granted, and only months into quarantine realized how important those face-to-face in-person interactions are. And so I call it cubism because while that style itself is very fragmented and abstract, and it draws attention to lines and overlapping shapes. So in a sense, I'm also trying to say that as we've been pulled apart into separate directions and being isolated into our own homes, I feel like there is a shared collective experience of pain and grief, but there are also individual differences that are very distinct, particularly across different social groups and peoples. And yet at the same time, I do try to counter that fragmentation with the colors and designs to soften the image.
That's wonderful. We really, the jury and we really loved the connection to kind of what so many of us are going through today, and thought that the squares were really evocative of the Rubik's Cube, the toy that you can arrange, which might be a great entry point for many people. So was the Rubik's Cube kind of imagery purposeful? And can you tell us more about your choice to use it?
Yeah, sure. So definitely it was purposeful. Metaphorically speaking, I think I was trying to represent how our spaces can be adjusted and how we can move around as well, even if certain spaces don't let us stay, such as home. And so it's like a puzzle in a sense, and we have the ability to rearrange our spaces to accommodate each other. I think we fully have that capacity. It's just there's no one solution to that. And it's hard to solve the Rubik's Cube. Like I wouldn't be able to do it. And I don't necessarily think that we have to reach a place where all the colors are grouped together and it's all very organized. And in fact, that's the reason I was really focused on how each design was very different from each other, and to show a lot of contrast. So there's really, no one solution to the issues surrounding occupation of spaces by different peoples. And the use of a Rubik's Cube shows how complicated that is. But at the same time, again, like with the softened colors, there's a sense of harmony and coexistence that I was trying to convey. as well as this constant and persistent change that isn't necessarily bad, but it can help the harmony, I guess, continue on.
Yeah, absolutely. We really liked this Rubik's Cube that can't be solved, and your idea that there is no one solution and maybe no need for any kind of solution is really wonderful. And I love that you're speaking to the experience that we're all having right now. These cubes also remind me of the Zoom cubes that we're all kind of stuck in right now in this event and other events. So I'm wondering if you want to reflect a little bit on working and studying from home and relying on digital tools and digital spaces as it relates to this work.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you thought of the Zoom icon. I didn't think of that, but as for me, I think it was really difficult to, like in the beginning especially, setting like schedules to make sure that you're touching in with, touch basing with friends at regular times. And I think it speaks to how compartmentalized and isolated our individuals' experiences have become since the pandemic. But on the other hand, we have a lot of social media, and it has helped us connect, especially like leading several critical social issue movements. And if you look closely, there are like little white alien-like bubbles or blobs. I'm not sure what I intended to do with that, but they're scattered between like the squares. And I actually originally planned for the piece to be really just design oriented and very geometric. But after I had finished, I felt like the gaps between the different designs and surfaces were kind of just empty. And I mean, yeah, they're empty and somewhat impersonable. And plus the fact that it's placed like in a Black background, which is meant to, I guess, a play on the word, as in like, it's representing the literal space in the sky, as in like our universe, but also just space in general. And because of that, there's a lot of this like emptiness. And I felt like by adding these little characters, it just adds the symbolizes the many channels of communication and social connection that are still possible during these times. And yeah, and it looks like they're snuggled under colorful blankets or quilts. So.
It does. I'm jealous of them right now. Thank you, Elaine, and congratulations.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. Okay, our next artist is Dante Kirkman, he, him. Dante is a freshman studying art studio and African American studies.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. So these three images, they're a part of a series that I started about my father's life growing up in East Menlo Park in East Palo Alto. East Palo Alto was the murder capital of the world in the 90s, and my father growing up in East Palo Alto and having to deal with the struggles there as a young Black man, I originally started documenting his story through documentary photography. And eventually I ended up going into gentrification. And so when I was prompted actually by my art class about migration, I thought of gentrification as a form of migration. And so I included these three images all relating to East Palo Alto and the migration of people from East Palo Alto out towards like Modesto, and just out of here as Facebook and Amazon take over East Palo Alto.
Yeah, that's so compelling. We were really drawn to the local subject matter of your work. I mean, thinking about how migration is happening around us today and really in our kind of, you know, to our neighbors here in this area. And as you mentioned, these three photographs are part of a larger series that you've been working on. And when the jury, we were looking at it, we noticed that you're using a number of different visual strategies. Some of them are more straightforward documentary images. Some of them, like the one on the right here, you've overlaid other images, and some you've used like blur and other things. So I was wondering if you would like to tell us a little bit more about the kinds of visual strategies that you're using to tell this story of East Palo Alto gentrification, and why you've chosen those strategies.
Yeah, so I chose those strategies. A good example is the one in the middle, and on the far right is I chose to use Facebook thumbs up just because Facebook and other companies have been a a big reason of gentrification, as like large companies move in and take over East Palo Alto. And in the middle, I have like a picture of like my father of like a picture of my father's classroom as a kid, like all X'd out, because just showing all the people that he grew up with who have either been murdered or have been had some kind of effect through East Palo Alto growing up in such a tough neighborhood. And so I felt that those would establish good context for the series, basically.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Yeah, I think it's very interesting to think about kind of the history of East Palo Alto and kind of where it, being the murder capital of the US in the 90s and today being taken over by gentrification. What are the linkages between those kind of two storylines? Because they're clearly not separate. But we'd love to hear also more about these three individual photographs. And I'll just say the jury selected these three out of the group that you sent. We really liked the echoing of the kind of X and the crosses and the echoing of the thumbs, and thought that they made a really nice tight grouping. But it would be great to hear a little more specifics on these three and how you see them potentially going together or not going together. If you disagree with us, that's fine too.
Yeah. So these three, I like them together as like just like a small portion of this series. And so starting with the first image on the far left, that's actually on Church, which is near the freeway, but it's facing out towards East Palo Alto. So I was kind of thinking of it as like turning my back towards like gentrification and like in the city as it changes. And in the picture I have my father in it, and him like turning it just because like he doesn't feel as welcome to the city he grew up in, and like now like he feels like an outsider, and everybody he knows has like either gone to prison or moved out. And so the middle image being anybody who has been a victim of drug abuse, murder, or just going into going to prison, basically. I feel like it gives like a bigger context and more important meaning to my father's story and this in the city he used to know growing up as a Black male, basically. And so for the image on the far right, I think it's important to also connect it. So like I said before, just kind of the larger companies who have come to take over and force everybody out. And as he like sees houses like of friends or his own house as a kid, and sees them being like bought out, basically.
Thank you for sharing that story, Dante, and congratulations.
Yes, and before we move on, actually, Dante, there's one more question from the chat. How many photographs are in the series? Because we only have 3 here.
I don't know the exact number. I have a good amount because I've been focusing on it for a couple of years now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, we will go on to our next artist, Michelle Say. They. Michelle is a sophomore studying art practice and Asian American studies.
Hi, everyone. I'm still at the grocery store. but the lighting is good here and the internet is good too. So yeah, this is my piece. It's called Dirt Road, and they're photos of these sculptures made out of concrete and rocks that I dragged out to photograph in a parking lot near my house in Illinois. And yeah, I made these as part of a series where like I was thinking about like the weight and the weight of memory and like the generational distance that comes from growing up like physically and like culturally far away from your roots. And they're part of a series. And the first, like I was just like dipping all kinds of fabric and old clothing and old curtains into concrete and making sculptures out of them. And I just thought they were all really depressing, and these came out kind of funky and weird and funny. So I really like them. Yeah, and they're just like less, you know, I feel like I was thinking a lot about like the pain and the darkness of like my diaspora story, but I feel like my parents, my ancestors like don't deserve that because like they really, I mean, they were capable of joy. They had fun and stuff too. They weren't really the paragons of like suffering and yeah, that I was making them out to be in like the initial pieces in my series. So yeah, there they are in the parking lot.
That's fantastic. The jury, we particularly loved this analogy of memory as something heavy that you kind of have to drag along with you, you know, or not if you choose to forget, I suppose. And we also thought that these kind of concrete and sock sculptures were reminiscent of human figures. So I was wondering, was this intentional, and how does it kind of change one's reading of it if we do think of them as human figures?
Yeah, I think when they came out, I realized they looked very like physical and gestural. But I think the earlier pieces I made in this series were more like directly related to this idea of like the weight of memory and like distance and forgetting. And these kind of just came out a little bit different. I think I was thinking more about like the materials that I was using for this. I don't know, I just think they're kind of fun.
Yeah, they're both kind of tragic and haunting, especially being photographed at night in these spaces, but also very like cute and weird as you've described them. It makes me think of sock puppets in a really great way. I was also wondering, I mean, this is part of a series, and so maybe you can speak to all the different environments that you photographed different sculptures in, but especially for these two, this pairing of photographs, why did you photograph the found sock sculptures in, you know, on the concrete of the parking lot and also kind of in the adjacent vegetation?
I wanted to put these pieces about like being far flung from where like my family and like my ancestors were from in conversation with like the physical place where I was living, which is suburban Illinois, kind of in the prairie. I was thinking a lot about what it means to be like grounded in the place that you're from. Like I felt like I didn't really identify with like the culture of like my hometown. It was like predominantly white and yeah, really Midwestern. But I really identified with like the natural landscape and like the natural history of where I was from. I just spent a lot of time outside growing up. And so I just put them together in these photographs.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. We'll let you get back to your grocery shopping, but congratulations. These are great photos.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Okay, our last winner of the evening unfortunately couldn't make it tonight. She was coming down with something, but Her name is Tiger Zhao, she, her. Tiger is a senior studying East Asian studies and art practice. Luckily, Tiger included a video of herself answering Maggie's questions as well as talking about her art. So we're gonna watch that now.
Hi, thank you so much for having me in the exhibit and allowing me to share more about my work. So in response to the first question, what were you thinking about the kinds of food that you took to school in this carrier when you made the work and how food connects us to culture? I think food is amazingly evocative. And when I first moved to the US, I did not know how much I would miss the food from my home country. Food is tied to culture, memories, physical and emotional well-being. And while I didn't set out to make a piece about the relationship between food and culture, I recognize the connection my work makes between them. So I modeled the lunch bag that I brought to school, and thinking about this allows me to go back in time and analyze the ways that assimilation affected me in those years. One prominent aspect was food. When I stopped bringing my own lunches and instead ate the lunches that were provided by school, because of convenience and because of jealousy and the fear of being different, and standing out because of my own culture's food, I replaced my culture's cuisine with an American diet and food from other countries and regions. So food actually has a really emotional quality for me, and I think for most people. When I think of or smell the food that I used to eat when I lived in China, I feel a hunger on a completely different level. And I think it's a hunger that's connected with emotions and memories. And the second question I thought was really interesting. Can you speak to whether current events informed or has changed the ways that you were thinking about this work? So I will attempt to answer this question. I didn't intend to refer to the meaning of the word carrier as in somebody who is contagious with the virus when I named my piece. But I think first of all, I think the pandemic has affected us all in different ways. And for me, it has increased this need for home, and home is connected to safety. And for me, that means going back many, many years, back to the time when I lived in China. And one of my hopes and personal intentions is to travel there when the time is right, to connect with the people, culture, and place that I have lost touch with, and learn more about myself in the process. Also gaining more experience in China and learning more about the good and the beautiful as well as the bad and the ugly. I carry this sentiment and the weight of it in my heart for now. I think the connection that one feels to home is in the whole body. The global pandemic has caused us all to worry tremendously about our health and others' health, as well as their safety and security. Whereas some people could previously take these things for granted, I think we are all realizing now how terrible this crisis is and how vulnerable we are. So additionally, I think the word carrier can also bring up the idea that we all carry unique identities and stories, and we should all be able to speak about them. And that is my belief. Thank you so much for allowing me to answer these questions, and thank you so much for featuring me in this exhibit.
I'm so glad we were able to hear from Tiger through her own words in that video. And in absentia, congratulations, Tiger. We were all very struck by this work. It's beautiful and very thought-provoking.
Awesome. Thank you, Maggie, and thank you, Tiger, in absentia. Before we end for the evening, there was an honorable mention through the works, and this was done by Sarah Kim, she, her. Sarah is a junior who is majoring in product design and minoring in art practice. So Maggie's just going to say a few words about why she loved Sarah's work.
Yes, thank you, Aubrey. So we couldn't squeeze in a seventh artwork into tonight's showcase, but I really loved this work and wanted to give it an honorable mention. It's a really beautiful, very proficient and polished photograph. And we thought that the hair was a very kind of evocative, the hair as a wave was a very evocative motif. And it was clear, Sarah, that you were really thinking about the works in the exhibition as inspiration. And we appreciated that. So congratulations, Sarah, also on a really beautiful work. And congratulations again to our 6 winners of the night.
Okay, that actually concludes this evening's event. If you have any questions for any of the artists, feel free to unmute yourself, feel free to put them in the chat, either way. But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being with us through Museum Nights. It's been such a pleasure putting these on for everyone. Yes, and congratulations to all the winners.